All right, I am so excited to have Deena Kastor on the podcast today. I am definitely fangirling, big moment, and I am a huge. Most people that have listened to the podcast know that I am a huge lover of your book, Let Your Mind Run. I think that it really, really transformed the way that I approach running, and I think for so many people as well that I know that have read it, it's just been such a game changer in the realm of running. And so it's just such an honor to have you on the podcast. And I am just so excited to chat with you today and pick your brain about the book and your running journey. But before I get into my own questions and things, I just wanted to give you a chance to properly introduce yourself and share a little bit more about yourself.
Oh gosh, thank you, Liz. What a pleasure. I think knowing that the book hit you like it did when I was in the throes of writing it and in tears because I didn't think I had any more to give, but my editor was being demanding and my co-author kept asking questions, and I just said, I have no more answers. I can't write about this anymore. And having my little meltdowns, I thought, the whole reason for doing this is to try to help someone else, to let them see their mental strengths. And so I was hoping it would have a positive impact on people's lives. So it's a really confirming when I hear stuff like that, because even in the torture of the 3-year writing process, I really, really hoped that it would have an impact on someone's life and in their running life, but also in life in general. I feel like we'd be cheating ourselves if we weren't taking these great tools that we were learning in running, from goal setting to resiliency to bouncing back to fortitude and determination. All these character traits we build in ourselves while we're in our running shoes should be applied to our daily lives. We'd be cheating ourselves if we were just keeping it in the silo of the running world. My hope was, I think I would have had a much easier time writing about mastering mile repeats or the long run. But instead you got what was going on in my head, thanks to years of journal writing and my parents keeping a lot of scrapbooks so I could go to race results.
That's incredible. I think that just kind of getting a glimpse into like your entire really like life and your running journey and how you really got started, I think was so interesting, especially I think for me personally, who never so much like ran in high school or middle school or anything. I was always kind of like I saw the track and field and cross country runners and I kind of thought that would be really cool, but I was always more of a soccer player. And so I think that I saw running at the time as more of a conditioning element rather than the main part of the sport. But I found it really interesting in like the first part of your book where you got into the sport and you had your first track race and you were running just on the heels of one of your teammates or one of your competitors, and you sort of you kind of like knew that you could have gone faster, and at the end you felt like you could have given more. And then once you kind of got into, all of your wins and you started winning, and what was that like? Did you know when you were that young that you would be as successful as you've been?
Yeah, I don't think I looked so far down the line. I wasn't that forward thinking. But Noelle Hagenberger was my first race, and she won. I was second, but I was told that she was the best, so I just sat on her and let her carry me through because I had no idea what I was doing. Um, but I think that it was a really big lesson from the very beginning, although I didn't really understand it at the time because I would relive that lesson years later at the 2004 Olympic Games, where my goal was to medal. Um, and I truly believe that I was the fittest person on that day, but I reached my goal and not beyond it. And sometimes I think we could actually, if we leave ourselves open to possibility, we could surpass the goals that we have for ourselves when our training goes well and the weather is great or your strategy is working in your favor. Like there's so much thinking and processing that we can do and reaction we could have along the way that sometimes we limit ourselves, even though our goals seem really high achieving, like wanting to medal in the Olympic Games. I I just earned the medal instead of putting myself up there to see if I could win the race that day. So I think sometimes we have to relearn lessons in order for them to really stick. I lived that in the World Cross Country Championships against Paula Radcliffe when I was like, "Oh my God, I'm leading the entire world in this cross country race, and I'm shoulder to shoulder with Paula Radcliffe." And we just took it to the finish line, and I let her win the race. I didn't fight for it at all because I'm like, "This is so cool. I'm going to get a silver medal on the world stage." Without at the in the finish, I was like, well, that was dumb. She's like dry heaving on her hands and knees, and I'm sitting here jumping up and down, wondering where my Guinness is because it was in Ireland. So I just feel like time and time again, I've limited myself with what I've set out to do, and so following that always comes a race where I just don't put up any boundaries and I just go for it. And those have been my greatest races.
Yeah.
The ones that I don't put those limitations on what I can accomplish.
Yeah, yeah, because then that next race, you ended up beating Paula Radcliffe's record, right? And
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Which
yeah,
isn't
that was
really validation. It was the Carlsbad 5,000. So I broke her world record in the 5K, and it felt like validation a little bit, but it wasn't the world championships.
yeah.
So I mean, I could talk myself in and out of feeling good about that one.
Yeah, yeah. But what you were mentioning there, I think it really makes me think of one of my favorite quotes from the book that where you mentioned that there were moments where you finished a race knowing that you could have run better, sensing that there was more in you that you didn't know how to access, that none of that was conscious, but it was there. And obviously, I feel like by the end of the book, you kind of like I guess, like, find that point, I guess, because I feel like at some points you kind of seem like you're searching for that, and I feel like that's so applicable to so many runners, including myself, and for me, for instance, for an example, like, I have races where you go out too fast, and then you start to run every other race really scared, because then you're scared of having that same experience, but kind of knowing deep down in those latter races where you're running really cautiously that oh, like you finish and you have more to give and you're not on your hands and knees and you're not like, and yeah, I'm just wondering like what was that journey like? I know that you kind of like walk through that in the book, but like I guess like when you're applying it to say like an everyday runner of knowing, how do you access like your full potential?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it never really comes in one race. I mean, it's very, I don't say not possible, but it's very rare if you just get this perfect day where you execute everything. You usually just learn little tools along the way. Like I remember missing a water bottle, missing a couple water bottles in a race, and not having the energy at the end of it. So the next race, I am just obsessed with my hydration, right? Like I am gonna train with it, and even like over concentrate the fluid and try to consume more than typical, so I can have the calories at the end. And then that race, it's all about getting my bottles, and you're just like obsessively counting down like 8 water bottles, 7 water bottles, 6 water bottles. um, and then you really learn your hydration strategy, and then the next race it might be something else that you're learning. So I feel like you're just kind of piecing it together, which I think is what makes the marathon and just running in general such a hook, because it does just put us on this path of self discovery. And we learn a lot about ourselves in training blocks. We learn a lot about ourselves during the races themselves, although those lessons come a little more critically because that's our goal. So I think it's a beautiful process that unfolds in front of us. I just recently, and I know like I fill my spiritual running cup by exploring on new trails. And I know that about myself. And it wasn't until last month that I went on a training run with some teammates who had a kind of an off week so they can go and like do whatever they wanted, explore. And we went on this 10-mile run up and over this pass to this lake, And I was like, gosh, I did not do this all summer. And running felt so stale and unwelcoming. It just felt monotonous. And
Mm.
and this is something I know. So it's like we have to like relearn even what makes us tick, which is so crazy that after 40 plus years of being in this sport that I keep like reminding myself or rediscovering. So I've done 3 trail runs since then. Yesterday was an epic day. Um, Figuring out how to make this big loop on the John Muir and Pacific Crest trails and end up right
Mm.
back where I started from. And I had some wiggle room that if I got lost, I would still be able to pick my daughter up from school in a timely manner. But it's like you just have just a constant, and I think that's what I love so much about this sport. That right now I'm not chasing personal bests, but every time I'm out there is just such a great feedback loop for me that that running just continues to give and give and give.
Yeah, yeah, and I think about as well when you finished, I think it was you finished college and you were sort of deciding on whether or not you would pick running back up because you had the injury sort of like that final year. And I also want to talk about like the different injuries that you've had and just like the different mindset around that as well. But the conversation that you had, I think, with someone named Milan before you spoke to your coach Vigil, who you had for a very long time. But I think that when he had mentioned sort of like had asked you, had you given it your all? And just like that being what seems like just a true turning point, and what went from, oh, you might come visit Alamosa, Colorado, to you just actually picked up your things and you moved and you fully committed to it. What sort of was the change from, I guess, like that harsh experience in college and having that first injury, feeling like you let the team down in so many ways, but then thinking, okay, I might give this one last shot after graduating.
Yeah, it was such a complicated time. Just really, just in a struggle mentally, and so I learned so much, especially like looking back and like, wow, I was not easy on myself at all.
Mm,
Because my co-author Michelle, when I was telling her about all my struggles in college and writing about it and sending it to her, like season after season, indoors and outdoors, and looking back at my logs and what they said, like really mean comments in the margins, like, you're a piece of shit, how did you let your team down like that? Like, my God, I can't believe I talked to myself like that. And so I had no self-respect. I had a huge burden of feeling like I owed my team a win in every single situation I was in because I was getting a free education and I felt the burden of that free education
mm,
every single day. So hard on myself. And I think because I wasn't treating myself kindly, I wasn't respecting my body. And so I just got in this cycle of injuries, and I wasn't happy enough to pull myself out of it and prioritize my mental health and physical health and really like pull myself together. I just didn't have any of those tools available. And so as I was grappling, and at the time, the only thing that was giving me positive feedback was baking, because
yeah.
every time I was making a delivery of muffins or bagels or bread bowls for soup to different cafes, everybody, like, the owners would say like, oh my gosh, here's some of the feedback we got this week or yesterday. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And you have these special orders because people want to order through us. And so it was like, oh my gosh, like this feels good. Like this kind of response feels good, not like the head shaking or the head scratching of like, why isn't Deena doing better in her running shoes? And so it was a hard decision after college. I didn't feel like I had really a supportive path to go in, despite having a double major of English with emphasis in creative writing, a second major in journalism. I just felt like I had nothing to rely on to
Mm,
move forward. So the words now, Coach Mylan Donley, when he said, "Have you given it your all?" seemed like so benign. Like, I feel like anybody could have said that, and I would have just hung on like those words, because I just needed anything to give me a sign, to give me a sense of direction. And so when he gave me Coach Vihill's number and I called Coach Vihill, and I just immediately felt like inspired and moved and felt like I don't know anything about this sport that I have been in for so many years, but this man, I feel like I already trust what I can learn from him. He seemed so wise, and he to this day is the greatest mentor in my life. 90,
Mm.
he's turning 94 next
Wow.
month, and so each year we head out to Arizona to give him a visit. But still, just my greatest mentor because he really did change my life.
That is incredible. And I think one of the funniest parts, I think, when I was reading, like, when you first moved and you first started to get coached by him, was his emphasis on, okay, Dina, bring a good attitude. Or even if you showed up and it was a really dark day, or it was, bad weather, and, you and the group probably weren't really looking forward to the training run. And he would say, Dina, you look great. Or Dina, you look, and you might have like a sad look on your face. And I think just watching the transition of like how you kind of started and kind of like were confused by it, and suddenly you realized why he was saying these things, and how that then transitioned into how you saw and approached each run. How was that transition, and like was that sort of what initially led you to read these books that kind of taught you about like taking energy from like nature and the outdoors?
Yes, absolutely. Coach Vigil has a PhD in exercise physiology, but he was definitely a psychologist. He would see that I was just like obsessively grumpy or focused on the weather, which we have no control over, instead of the task that we had to do in that moment, which was to get the workout in. And he would just disrupt it with something positive, and it would like make me chuckle or roll my eyes. But the very first time I twisted my thoughts in a run, I could feel the physical difference of my posture and my form and my power output, and because of that, the outcome of the run itself. So it was so powerful, and it made me so excited that I had control over that. So it just really led me down this path of like, how do I keep manipulating things in these 8 inches above my shoulders, just keep manipulating my thoughts. They say fake it till you make it. Like, your subconscious doesn't know if you're lying or telling the truth, so you might as well lie in a good way, and like tell yourself how fabulous and strong and powerful and unstoppable you are. To put those words in your head, and that was so new to me because
Mm.
I had spent my collegiate years being very tough on myself, and it felt like kind of giddy. I felt giddy about it, but also like obnoxiously cheerleading myself. And it felt fun to do that. And I was kind of like pretending, but it had results. And so I feel like over time it became more sincere when I was in my head and using those affirmations, and kind of, your initial thoughts can still be doom and gloom, but you have it in you not to settle for those thoughts and to work with them until they serve you better. So it put me on a never ending mission to do that. And I find myself suggesting to my daughter very similar things when she's like throwing clothes out of the closet, like I have nothing to wear. And I'm like, well, as you're throwing all the things that you could be wearing out onto the floor, um, why don't you go do your hair first and then like take a breather and then come back, and maybe you'll see your clothes in a different light, and just trying to disrupt her train of thought like Coach Vigil did for me. So I feel like it applies to just about everything we do. Our attitudes really have a profound effect on every nook and cranny of our lives.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the like watching sort of like that change your approach to races and stuff, and sort of like just being able to quickly just downplay any anxious thoughts, any negative thoughts, and turn them into positive ones. I think one of the most shocking ones that I found was when you were getting ready for London Marathon the first time, and you felt a calf strain or like calf pain, and you were like so convinced that it was like definitely something that was like an injury or painful, and you were telling everyone, and everyone was telling you like, Dina, it's all in your head. And then you had a moment of just, all right, calf, pull it together, we need to do this. And then by the next day you said the pain was gone. Like that
Right.
was Crazy.
Yeah, talking to my calf like no one's buying our story here, so we got to just suck it up and keep running. And it is, I feel like then if I reflect back on my collegiate years of having injury as an excuse to not even get out and try because I subconsciously thought I was going to fail again. And so
Mm.
let's have this injury cycle so that I don't have to keep being so disappointing when I'm out there. And it's so complicated what goes on in our head and how our body physically manifests from the thoughts that we have. But I think I had so much invested in the London Marathon. I had put it out there that Joan Benoit Samuelson was my hero, my the probably the person responsible for starting running at the age of 11, because earlier that summer I saw her winning the 1984 Women's Olympic Marathon. Um, and here I was chasing her record. So it just felt so crazy to be doing that, and thinking I had the potential, but I could also screw it up and not do it. And so I think it was just really scary. I put a lot of pressure on myself by putting words out there, and in the reality of it, it was manifesting in my calf. The stress of it was manifesting in my calf because it was almost time to, I mean, it was time to taper. So like all the work was done, and all of a sudden I'm just waking up with a calf problem. It's not like I felt a pop or a strain in practice. So I knew that I was pretty convinced once Terrence put that in my mind, like it's not like you had a trauma injury. This is something you woke up with. So it's leading me to believe that your dreams that night were probably not very supportive of what you're trying to accomplish, a little bit scary, and you have it within you to do this. And so I think we have to be smart. We can't just dismiss our injuries all the time, because they all tell us something different. But the lesson there was that it's scary going after big goals, and sometimes we can self-sabotage in those moments, and knowing what that looks like, stepping back and having a bigger picture view. You sometimes need the help of a lot of people to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And do you feel like those nerves sort of like carried into even race day when you went to start the race and you realized that you hadn't gone to the bathroom before, and that sort of then obviously manifested in the race itself? I had that experience at Chicago last year in the marathon, and I commend you for running for almost the entirety of the marathon, needing to go to the bathroom, and I don't know how you
I just got the chills, you even mentioning it. Like the same chills came back that were prickly on my skin so many years ago. It's the worst feeling in the world. But I feel like, I mean, I don't know a marathoner out there that is immune to that stress race morning of wanting to make sure you go to the bathroom. So I mean, they invest so much in porta potties. Like they bring in porta potties from like every county and state or region, and bring them in for race day. I don't know how they find that many, and it never seems to be enough. But I I also feel like it gave me something to focus on other
Mm.
than everything else that was going on. So I do believe everything happens for a reason, but it was a very
Yeah.
uncomfortable reason to not obsess and stress out about breaking a record.
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say, I think I had it somewhere in my notes, but you still finished in like 2:21 and still finished in an incredible time. And I think that was that sort of like the first moment where it really like woke you up into and made you want to crave chasing after the marathon more. Because I know that you transitioned from the shorter distances on the track and cross country into the marathon distance.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning, when my very first marathon was New York in
Yeah.
2001, and I think the the purpose of it was just to build strength for the 10K, because I felt like I needed to like build strength on one side and work on my speed on the other in order to be able to compete with the best in the world in the 10,000 meters. And it turns out that this was actually my distance. And so I think the marathon in and of itself just because days aren't perfect, like needing to poop from mile 3 and then having 23.2 miles to go. I think there's so much imperfection along the way, whether it's in your buildup or the race itself, that it makes you crave getting it more right the next time. And so it just put me on this path of trying to get it right, trying to get the marathon right. And time again, there was always something, always seeming like there was something to tweak or fix. But I like having that focus when I'm in training, to just like be at home for 4 months at a time with a narrow focus on a race, and putting that pressure on myself. I will say that I was just explaining to someone who was getting ready for the Berlin Marathon that races are so strange psychologically, that in the beginning of the race, when I'm on the start line and you can like feel all the tension and buzz from the thousands of people that are surrounding you, I always just take a deep breath and say, this is no big deal. This is, you get in your running shoes every morning and you go out and do this thing. It's no different, except that there's more people next to you than just your teammates. And and I think of it as, this is no big deal, no big deal, no big deal. And then by mile 20 or sometimes 18, when it starts to not feel that great, and I think this is no big deal. I'm not like solving world problems here. No one's going to care if I pull over and sit on the curb. I think, no, this is a really big deal. And then I backpedal on all the downplaying I did the first half of the race when I was trying to contain my emotions. And then I have to like convince myself that my character matters and my character will not give up, because I've worked too hard for over these years to show weakness in this moment. I will not let this moment define me. I'm going to define myself in spite of it. And I keep going. So it's such a like bizarre stretch of a morning where you're just like talking yourself into things and out of things. And to me, I don't think I've ever taken it so seriously that it was like a doom or gloom moment. I'm just completely amused by how it unfolds that way all the time. It's like, no big deal. This is actually a really, really, really big deal.
Yeah, I think before you did New York Marathon, you were speaking to reporters about the difference that you felt between running on the track versus the marathon, and that running on the track felt like more of a performance versus the marathon felt more like you were in community and like more so running with them versus running for them. And I just thought that was such a really beautiful way to write about the marathon distance, because there really is something about the way in which you feel like a whole city, like New York when you ran it in 2001, can come together, especially after something so horrible happens, and just feel like you can come together and be there for one another in a sport like running. I think that another one of your marathons, the Olympic marathon in Athens, that seemed like a really, really incredible experience, but one that where it seemed like it all came together for you, because I know that the injury before Chicago, whilst it was tough, you were still able to run Chicago really well, and that was the first one that you won, but you didn't feel so satisfied just yet. But I want to hear more about Athens and just how beautiful that was, because I think that was sort of when you started to apply a lot of that like affirmations and like the
Mhm.
thinking from the sports psychologist of like, okay, I'm going to write that, I am going to medal or I am going to blank.
Right. And I think the highlight of Athens started in the training. It was like the specificity of running for heat, right? So I didn't expect it to be 101 degrees at the start line, but I knew it was going to be hot. So the heat and the hills and the humidity were all things that we had to train for. So putting on extra layers of clothing on long training runs, it was super uncomfortable at first, but that specificity was like a tiny percent of what I needed to beat some of the best in the world. And then learning that, because I had lived at altitude for so long, my body didn't physiologically feel the effects of altitude until I was at 12,000 feet. Granted, that's just sitting in a lab reading a book, and manipulating the amount of oxygen that was coming in. But that showed that maybe to get another training stimulus, I should move some training up. So Meb and I went up to Lake Mary, which instead of doing our workouts at 7,000 feet was then at 9,000 feet. And that was a whole new burn in workout. So knowing that I was getting a new stimulus there, and then knowing that my race strategy on race day was to go out conservatively so that I didn't overheat, and seeing by 10K in that race that women were already moving over to the side of the road to puke, or they were staggering in the middle of the road, already feeling at 10K the effects of the heat on the pace that they were running. So it made me like gave me a sense of security, like, okay, this was the right plan. But at one point I was like, I don't belong back here. Like, I
Mm.
want a medal and I can't even see the leaders. I've got to detach myself. We were in a single file line, all these girls drafting behind me. And I just remember the moment where I stepped to the side and put in a light surge, nothing crazy because I didn't want to burn sugars. I put in a light surge to get away from them. And I'm like, this pace actually feels better. So I stuck with it and I kept going. And then I just like that momentum of just continuously passing people one by one by one. And at one point, someone told me what place I was in. So once I got that confirmation, I started counting with every person that I was passing, and seeing finally like, oh my gosh, that's Elfnesh Alemu from Ethiopia up ahead of me. If I pass her, I'm going to get a medal. And then, of course, it got disrupted by a spectator saying that I was in fourth place right after I passed her. So I panicked for a second. But once I came into the stadium and got confirmation that I indeed was going to capture the bronze medal, it was a pretty emotional final lap around Panathinaikos Stadium because I heard my mother shouting the whole way.
Oh, that's amazing. And I know that like you speak as well about mile 19, and that being like the moment that you let go of caution and you fully released yourself from worrying about the heat, and instead you ran as if you were hammering a 10K. How did you sort of like, was that sort of like that point where you like figured out like, okay, I can tap into this uncapped potential, instead of sort of like wondering, like you said, like when you were running at the start and sort of running more so behind? Was that the moment that you kind of started to surge forward and say like, no, I belong up there and I'm going to trust myself and trust my body?
Right. So much of it was about running cautiously, but in that moment, mile 19, there's a very expensive pair of Oakley sunglasses on the ground in Athens that evening, throwing my glasses down because it was evening time, and just realizing that it's now worth the risk. I don't have much longer to go. And so if I can definitely suffer for 6 more miles, and it felt like a reasonable risk to take. So yeah, it was an exciting moment to just charge ahead. And I think at the time, my 24th mile was the fastest mile ever, or 25th mile was the fastest mile ever run in a marathon by a female. It was like 450 or something like that, because
Wow.
I just saw her ahead of me, and I could not let that gap last for any longer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is just crazy because I think about the Paris Olympic marathon this year as well, and watching Sifan Hassan at the very end and seeing like women after conquering these brutal, brutal marathon routes and still having so much energy left to surge forward and basically be like shoulder to shoulder fighting for that spot. But you can just see how much it like means to you and means to Stefan, like how much you've worked so hard for that spot. But I think as well, it was just so interesting the moment where you also said in the book that you realized that you had over prepared for these hills and the heat in your training. And yeah, just how incredible that must have felt to finish and get that bronze medal.
Yeah, such a great feeling when the work and dedication that not just me, but like my entire team. I hired 3 guys to train with me that summer and got them condos here in Mammoth, and they just put me through the ringer. And I just remember waking up every morning. I'd go to bed completely wiped out and exhausted, and I would wake up every morning feeling so refreshed. I was just dumbfounded that my body was like, all right, let's do this again. And so it was a really fun I will say that I think I was responding so well to the hard work because I was having the time of my life. The guys that came into our training group and everybody, we just had such a synergy and camaraderie, eating together and exploring together and going to the Olympic trials on the track together and then finishing off marathon training. And right to the very end, when we got on board our flight to leave for Athens, they were there in every mile that I ran.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And tell me about then the stress reaction that you got in training for Chicago. And I know that you went to the pool and still did your work there, and you even were able to then go and break the American record of the Philly half. Um, in all of these injuries that you've had that you kind of talk about throughout the book, it feels like the mindset sort of changes throughout. And I know that injury can be such a sore point for so many runners. And I think so many of us know that it's so much harder mentally than it is physically. Obviously, you can't do this thing that you love, but how did you see yourself sort of like change that, I guess, like approach to injury from your college years to this stress reaction before Chicago and then in Beijing, the sort of just heartbreaking moment. But even then, you kind of talk about like, I'm just grateful for this body versus I think in college you felt more of that weight of the pressure of just letting people down.
Right. I mean, I think typically an injury means that there's an imbalance in your body or that you need to take a break, right? You're like overworked, under rested, and so I would typically take time off. But because I rolled my ankle on a pine cone walking the dog and felt that there, and it wasn't a break, it was just like a really hot spot. I knew that because of the timing, that if I could just stay really disciplined in the pool and keep my cardio up, and my work ethic like focused on Chicago, that I still had time to put a bow on the training and head out to my prep race in Philadelphia for the half marathon and the marathon itself. So I felt like as I sat there, I really did take a good look. Like, is this going to be? Because I think the big question is this going to be career ending?
Mm.
And I thought that if I could, I could heal quickly, I'm healthy, I could heal quickly, but I need to give my body the time to do that. So giving it the time, I didn't walk around a lot. It was only doing underwater treadmill workouts and then spinning on the bike in the evening. And the rest of the time, I was a professional athlete, eating well and sleeping and taking care of myself, getting acupuncture to get some nourishment to the area. So I feel like I was pretty focused on making sure that I gave myself the time to heal. That hot spot went away, got confirmation, and then I slowly got into training again. I just felt that buzz of movement of being outdoors. So was able to stay focused the whole time. And I think the big question I always come back to is this going to could this put me out forever? And I never
Mm.
want that to happen. So I feel very lucky that that hasn't happened before.